So in going around Google Maps, I noticed this kind of interesting thing of an airplane flying by while the satellites, my understanding is Google Maps gathers its imagery from satellites, was taking the photo of this area. This is on Mountain Road in Stowe, Vermont. So what's happening here is that my understanding is that satellites, when they're taking images, they're taking them in different bands, which is like different sections of wavelengths, which and then those get combined together to make a either kind of a visual color image that we are used to seeing, or they can be combined in such a way that you can have see very interesting stuff that gives you different understandings of how plants are growing or various different things depending on what you're looking for. But those bands with satellites aren't taking it exactly the same time. They're taking it at a slightly different time, but given that they know how fast the satellite is moving and that time difference, they can combine them in such a way that for things that are standing still, like this building, you just see a building as if you was taking a photograph at precisely the same time. However, for something that's moving like this airplane, you can see the movement that's occurring based on the different locations that that the plane was when that the different bands were taken. You can even see it on a car. These cars are probably moving about 45 miles an hour, 40, 45 miles an hour in this section of road. With the airplane moving a lot faster and thus showing it's moved a lot more than the cars. And yeah, the airplane's also a little bit closer to the satellite, though I don't think substantially so. Um, but that would make it have a larger jump as well. But we see in the same location different imagery. This is stuff that's taken by the state, or the state has a contractor go out and fly with an airplane and take photos. You aren't seeing any, and yeah, the quality isn't as good. So if we go to a different location now down on the interstate, so they're even moving faster, probably about 70. While there's maybe a little bit of weird, doesn't quite look like a normal vehicle, maybe even like a little bit of rolling shutter effect, like it's canted off a little bit. These look like they're taken at the same time for each location. Um, Moving down to Boston, which is an area that they've have this kind of more 3Dified and more post-processed imagery. Um, we see out here is just really interesting. You can tell that this is a combination of many images because say at least three. It looks like three, but there's some areas it looks like more, where these sailboats are moving around in the winds and currents. These sailboats at anchor, and they've combined all these images, and thus you get kind of various faded out where it's like this, if the sailboat's in the same spot in multiple images, you see it's overlapped. Um, but if they're kind of in one spot, it's just very faint, and there's various different levels of that. But you see these motorboats, which are just kind of going through, have been taken out of frame, like they've been erased, probably because they're machine learning, AI, whatever you want to call it. Um, Basically, computer programs have figured out how to detect that, oh, there's this one oddity in this one image in this one spot, so we're going to replace it with the kind of the background that's in all the rest of the images. You can also see that down here where they've done that for the interstate. There's no cars on the interstate, and this imagery isn't from the middle of COVID. There's cars everywhere else, both parked as well as like at a stoplight. And we can go prove that with Google Earth, which looks like the same image, but isn't it's just a single image rather than the combining of the multiple. They don't have that 3D effect, at least in the way I'm viewing this part of Google Earth. So it looks like that, of course, has some limitations as we see with the sailboats. Moving into downtown Boston with the tall buildings, you can see there's kind of they have a 3D model of it. And if we go into kind of the oblique view, you can see that the edges aren't as like finely detailed as the tops. and maybe finely detailed isn't the right word, but there's definitely a little bit of weird stuff going on in this edge view, and I think the reason for that is that Google isn't taking, though we're viewing it as a very oblique image, they aren't taking oblique images of the sides of these buildings. They're just kind of using a trick of what can be done with imagery. So this is a single frame. This is from 1962, where I can actually get imagery that's still distributed as a single frame, whereas the modern stuff that I download from the state Open Geodata portal is kind of all stitched together, so you can't tell where the center of each individual image is. You can kind of tell sometimes where the boundaries are, but not each individual. Here's City Hall in Burlington, and you see it's looking pretty straight down. We're pretty close to the center of the image, and you aren't seeing any sides of the building. However, if we just go a couple blocks up here, this building is, you do see the side of the building. That's because even though the camera's looking straight down at a particular point, there's the spread to get this whole image. And what you can do with that is there's a couple things. One, I think Google's kind of taking that sideways spread of the image and using that to fill in the sides. But what this also allows you to do is do photogrammetry on imagery and like figure out the heights of buildings and the heights of the landscape, which is how like contour lines for years and years and years before they got like either the radar topography um, or now LiDAR, that's how they figured out what elevation things were at. If we move down to this location, this is still in Boston. Um, Kind of one of the interesting things is that I'm pretty sure I can see. It's a little bit hard to know for certain, but I'm pretty sure I can see that when they're doing this, they're using the photogrammetry, and while it used to be done manually, like during World War II, nowadays there's computer programs that can do it to figure out elevations, and it's not as accurate as like a lidar developed elevation, but you can use it from just, if you have multiple images of the same area from different like angles, you can figure it out. And it can also like see um, under like the eaves of these buildings, which either just my brain is tricking me into that, or the Google's model is actually seeing it. And I haven't been able to refine the exact location today, but earlier I thought I'd seen something that very clearly indicates to me that it's not just my brain tricking me. I think it was this building, but I'm also on a slower internet connection, and it may not be loading than when I'd seen it previously. Um, Whereas kind of traditional LiDAR, though I'm sure you can do, I know you can do a kind of side shot LiDAR to figure stuff out, but kind of traditional straight down LiDAR would just see the whole building and tell you where the building is as a DSM. Um, and instead of having to have a separate LiDAR flight for this, if you can figure it out at least approximately, which is fine for making a DSM for layering photog or imagery over, um, you can figure out how tall these buildings are and have a 3D model of a space.